Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has warned Iran not to launch any further attacks on gas facilities in Qatar after Tehran launched multiple strikes on infrastructure in the country. Iran targeted the Ras Laffan liquefied natural gas hub on Wednesday evening, causing extensive damage. It's the world's largest complex of its kind. It processes gas from Qatar's North Field in the Persian Gulf. Tehran says the strikes were in retaliation for an Israeli attack on Iran's South Pars facilities earlier in the day. Iran is heavily dependent on gas and uses it to generate about 80% of the country's electricity. Well, President Trump said neither the U.S. nor Qatar knew anything about the attack there on the South Pars field, adding that Israel had acted out of anger. In a statement online, he stressed that it would not happen again. No more attacks will be made by Israel, he wrote, pertaining to this extremely important and valuable South Pars field unless Iran unwisely decides to attack a very innocent, in this case, Qatar, in which instance the United States of America, with or without the help or consent of Israel, will massively blow up the entirety of the South Pars gas field. Well, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth told reporters that Iran is following a pattern of exploiting energy supplies, but that it may want to reconsider this strategy.
We have objectives. Those objectives are clear. We have allies pursuing objectives as well. And the truth speaks for itself. I mean, President Trump was very clear about that. Iran has weaponized energy for decades. Israel clearly sent a warning, and POTUS has made it clear, very clear. Iran knows when you hit Karg Island and you hit military capabilities on Karg Island, which is the only thing we hit, we can hold anything at issue, anything. The United States military controls the fate of that country. Iran has the ability to make the right choices. It should not, going forward, target Arab allies, Arab countries, trying to create pain, the pain that they created themselves.
All right, I want to pull in now Christoph Rühl. He's an economist specializing in macroeconomics and energy economics. It's good to have you on the program. I just want to get your reaction to what we've been hearing in the last hour. The Israeli Prime Minister making it clear that the U.S. president had nothing to do with these attacks. I mean, obviously there's the diplomatic part of this, but there has to be an attempt here to settle the nerves of a jittery global energy market.
Yes, that's for certain. And I think what matters here is not so much whether Israel did it without the US's knowledge, which is probably hard to believe, whether they did it out of fury and without thinking, which is even harder to believe, or whether they are all now backpedaling, trying to get Trump out of the line of fire, as your correspondent has said. What really matters here is the reaction of Iran. And Iran has demonstrated two things. Number one, that they are willing to escalate this a step further. And number two, that they do have the capacity, despite what the American defense minister just said, still have the capacity to target precisely not only energy in general or their Gulf neighbors in general, but precisely a particular field, precisely the industrial city where the gas is produced, precisely where it hurts. And this looks to energy markets as a strategy which can escalate even further. And every day which passes by, it becomes harder and harder for the Trumps and Netanyahus after others on the other side to de-escalate and to get their way out if that's what they want.
When you consider that crude prices shot up yet again today, and you see what's happening tonight, what we're hearing from the White House as well as from the Israeli Prime Minister, it looks like these leaders saw a situation that was about to get out of control, and they've tried to pull us back from the brink of a global energy catastrophe. Is that how you see it?
Yes and no. For the no part, clearly it is inconceivable to me as an energy economist, and I think to every single one of my peers globally, how you could start a war against Iran without having a plan against eventualities such as the closure of the Strait of Hormuz or attacks on the Gulf countries, because not only has Iran indicated all along that they would use these levers, everybody in the US and in the West in general, in military and economic and in energy circles, has warned of that, and has for 40 years now said, be careful, there is this this choke point, which we need to watch out for. And then to go and start it without a plan B is the first surprise. But to your question, it becomes more difficult for Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu sort of step out of there on the one side, and it becomes clearer there's a strategy of asymmetric warfare on part of the Iran is bearing fruit. They don't seem to have only isolated groups shooting blind rockets. They have the capacity to target it, and as somebody said, you can paralyze a place like Dubai with a rocket per month. You don't need to have the same kind of firepower. It's an example of asymmetric warfare, and it seems to be working.
And considering the volatility that we've seen in this region, just the amount of violence and the attacks, are you surprised that we haven't seen oil prices in particular shoot up even more? I mean, it almost seems on the outside that the markets are rather restrained in their worried reactions.
It seems like that, but this isn't quite the case. What happens here is that markets are more worried about things which may yet come than about the current disruptions. Oil markets, for example, have been extremely well supplied. And even a disruption in the Strait of Hormuz, as long as Saudi Arabia can use this pipeline they have to ship parts of that at least through the Red Sea, it's not quite the 20%, which is always mentioned in the press. It's a little less. And inventories in China, in Europe, in the US, everywhere are very, very well supplied. There's a lot of oil on the water. So markets could take that hit without massive price spikes. That they don't, and that you see these attempts for prices to go higher and higher, is always that there seems to be always another round which nobody thought was conceivable, like now the attack on the Pars field to come, and then who knows what's next. That's what worries markets. And the Pars field is a giant field, but the part which is controlled by Iran serves, as you have mentioned, Iran's domestic economy. So by blowing that up, that's one of the dilemmas the Americans have. They would make it impossible for Iran, should there ever be a regime change, to run their economy in a halfway sensible way for the next few years, because they had no power and no gas. And for Qatar and for the rest of the world, this field produces exactly the liquefied natural gas, which has saved Europe when Russia attacked Ukraine and the pipeline was interrupted. So it's also something you don't want to lose. And that's where this caution comes from, which we are observing now.
Christoph Rühl, as always, Mr. Rühl, we appreciate your time and your valuable insights tonight. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Well, I'm joined now by Benjamin Schmitt. He's a senior fellow with the Democratic Resilience Program at the Center for European Policy Analysis. Benjamin, it's good to see you again. There's a lot to unpack here. I mean, each side in this war has now attacked oil-related infrastructure. How worried are you about oil production being maintained in the Gulf region?
Well, look, Brent, it's not time to be worried. This is what's going on. We're just going to have to keep up with this as we go. I'm looking at the laundry list of Iranian strikes against Arab, both natural gas and oil facilities. You have the Qatar facility, one of the largest in the world for producing LNG, which, of course, the EU imports roughly 12% so far this year. 12% of its LNG imports come from Qatar. Iran also targeted oil facilities in Kuwait's Mina Al Abadi and Mina Abdullah refineries. Aramco reports the refinery was hit in Saudi Arabia, and the UAE has intercepted some incoming missiles and ordnance aimed at its oil production capabilities. So, Brent, this is. I mean, if we're talking about energy security threats, which of course you and I have talked about many times over the years, this is, again, just like Russia's open attacks on civil energy infrastructure in Ukraine. This is the apex of energy security threats around the world.
And what has been attacked is not just any place, right? I mean, talk to me about the significance of South Pars, particularly to the economy of Iran.
Well, look, South Pars has a significant role in Iran's own energy security itself, because its natural gas is supplying its electricity system, and of course, this is also a field that is split out in the Persian Gulf between Iran and Qatar. And this tit for tat, this eye for an eye approach that we keep seeing between the U.S. and Israel and Iran, in particular related to energy infrastructure. This has got to stop, or else we're going to be in a much, much more dire world of hurt when it comes to energy security risks globally.
Yeah, you say that. I heard one analyst say yesterday that if this area were to be severely damaged, destroyed, he said it would take up to a decade for the global economy to recover from the shock that would go out from the attack. I mean, do you think that the stakes are that dire right now?
I don't know about a decade, but we're talking a long time, Brent, where we're talking about rebuilding significant energy infrastructure. And remember, these energy infrastructure, in this case, oil and gas facilities, they're immediately vulnerable to explosive ordnance for obvious reasons. But rebuilding the facilities that produce these, oil and gas in the region, that's something that's going to take years, right? It takes time to rebuild. Not only do we have to make sure they're secured to begin with and we're past this conflict, but even after that, it's going to take time to clean up, rebuild. And then in the case of oil fields, which of course some of them are being shut down and production is slowed down because the space and the volume for oil storage in the Middle East, we've seen this in Kuwait and a few other locations already, that's running out. And as a result, you start to harm those fields, meaning that the global economy is going to see premiums put into the oil price in the long term if these fields can't return to full production that they were before this war against Iran began. Yeah,
a lot of unanswered questions in this crisis. Benjamin Schmitt, as always, good to have you on the program. We appreciate your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brent. Appreciate it.
And let's get more on all of this. We are joined now by energy policy analyst Ben Cahill, who is with us from Washington. We're seeing Iran's targeting of Gulf energy facilities now marking the biggest escalation in this nearly 3-week war. How damaging have the strikes been so far to global supply?
Well, there's been a serious escalation in the last 24 hours. I think the attack on Iran's South Pars field really prompted Iran to lash out in a major way at energy infrastructure across the Gulf, most notably in Qatar. There was an announcement today from Qatar Energy's CEO that several of its LNG trains or production facilities have been affected. 2 out of the 14 have been knocked out. According to him, 12.8 million tons per year of LNG capacity could be lost for 3 to 5 years. And the significance of this really cannot be overstated. I mean, this is the world's largest LNG export facility. Qatar supplies close to 20% of global LNG. More than 80% of its LNG cargoes typically go to Asia. And it's not just LNG, it's lost production of condensate and helium and other products as well. And this is in addition to all the other attacks on energy infrastructure that we've seen in Iraq and across the Gulf. I mean, multiple refineries have been attacked, upstream facilities. So day by day, the toll of all this damage is really escalating and it's spreading.
You mentioned that quote there that it might take, years to restore things back to their further capacity. I mean, that was at one facility specifically. And I'm just wondering if you're hearing that also more broadly, because, ultimately this is no longer just about the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. It's now infrastructure that has been damaged. How big a turning point is this for the markets?
I think day by day, it's becoming clear that this is not a conflict that's going to be resolved immediately. And for the energy markets, it won't be a quick resumption to business as usual in a matter of weeks. I mean, these are massive facilities that take a long time to repair. Spare parts for a lot of these complex gas to liquids facilities, liquefaction plants, and refineries are not simply lying around. And the scale of the damage is increasing. So, just to stick with natural gas and LNG for a minute, I mean, I think the hope was that if the conflict didn't escalate, maybe you could have a return to operations within a month. It typically takes probably at least 2 weeks to restart production, if not longer, at a major liquefaction train. Now it looks like we're going to be losing supply for probably a matter of months. And again, some of those trains could be affected for years. And that's in the best case scenario if the conflict stops today. On the oil front, I think the scale of disrupted oil exports from the Strait of Hormuz is clear. We could have 10 million barrels a day or more of production that's shut in already. And you can't just flip a switch and return to business as usual. This means a major disruption for a long period of time for crude oil, natural gas liquids, LNG, industrial gases. It's a complex set of energy supply chains across the world, and the knock-on effects are just becoming clear. It's showing up in things like increased prices for jet fuel. Different countries in Asia are already having to ration energy use. You see it in Sri Lanka and Thailand and other places around Asia. So the pain of this is going to be felt most acutely in Asia, but events are just accelerating each day. And so the trend is definitely worrying.
And I'm wondering, because we do have some governments, and I'm thinking in particular about the EU efforts, because EU leaders, they're meeting now to try and agree on some quick fixes to try and mitigate this surge in prices. What tools do you see that governments might have at their disposal in order to do so?
Honestly, the toolbox is pretty limited at this point. On the oil side, there's already been an announced release of strategic stocks by the International Energy Agency, the largest in history. The United States, Japan, South Korea, and many other countries are going to participate in that. What that does is essentially buy time. It adds more oil onto the market. It alleviates some of that short-term pressure. But frankly, the scale of disruption that we've already seen in the Strait of Hormuz is so big that SPR releases and removing sanctions on certain barrels that are on the market to free up that oil and get it flowing to customers, all these things are just not big enough to cope with the scale of the disruption. I think what the market is looking for is a signal of when this conflict will wind down and if it will be safe at some point for tankers to transit the Gulf. Unless it's safe for tanker owners, vessel owners to transit the waterway, you're going to have a sustained production hit for some time. And I think the Gulf countries have already done quite a good job at maximizing other available export outlets. Saudi Arabia, for example, is sending as much oil as it can through the East-West pipeline to its port on the Red Sea. UAE has a bypass pipeline. But all these things are pretty limited in terms of the scale of this disruption.
And we have, in the meantime, crude oil spiking to $118 a barrel today. I'm just wondering, from your perspective, with that undetermined timeline, how quickly this could come to an end, how high do you think oil prices might go?
Frankly, I think a lot of people in the market are surprised that it hasn't gone up even more. It's hovering a little bit above $110 a barrel today for Brent crude. But where you see a lot of the distress showing up is in things like jet fuel and naphtha. So with the disruption of output in multiple countries, some of those refinery inputs are simply not available in Asia. And so the stress is really showing up in the middle of the market, things like middle distillates, diesel, jet fuel. And generally what this means is that refiners are going to have to pay a lot more. And in some cases, they're probably going to have to cut runs. This is where I think the consumer impact becomes pretty acute. Airlines in Asia, for example, have already announced big price increases. And I expect this to grow. So, again, I think the question is, how long is this conflict going to last? And are there off-ramps available? And the market is really looking for signals of whether or not things will escalate, remain the same, or if there will be hopefully a rapid wind down to this conflict in the coming days so that we can at least stabilize and rebuild from where we are today.
All right, Ben, we want to thank you so much, Ben Cahill, for giving us, your expertise there. I'm sure it's not the last conversation that we'll be having on this, and we very much appreciate your insight. Thanks.
Thank you.